Whispers of the Danube. The lamplight flickers against papyrus, casting dancing shadows across words that feel too small for the vastness of this night. Here, in a tent beside the great Danube, a young man named Lucius dips his reed pen once more into ink and wonders if anyone will remember what he writes. It is the year 178 of our common era. The Roman frontier stretches like a held breath along the river's edge, and Emperor Marcus Aurelius himself walks among these camps, writing his own thoughts by firelight. But tonight we follow different footsteps, quieter ones. The steps of those who serve in shadows, who keep the records, who watch and listen and carry the weight of other people's stories. Lucius sets down his pen and rubs his tired eyes. Through the tent flaps, he can hear the murmur of soldiers sharing their evening meal, the soft splash of water against the wooden docks, the distant call of night birds across the Danube. He has spent another day transcribing reports, supply lists, casualty counts, dispatches to Rome that speak of glory and conquest in language that feels hollow in his mouth. The scribe's tent is modest, as befits his station. A low wooden table serves as his desk, its surface worn smooth by countless hours of work. Scrolls line makeshift shelves, some containing the emperor's philosophical musings, others filled with the mundane details that keep an army fed and moving. A small brazier provides warmth against the river's chill, its coals glowing like tiny stars fallen to earth. Outside, the Danube flows eternal and indifferent. Lucius has watched it for months now, this great river that marks the edge of the known world. Sometimes it runs gray-green under cloudy skies. Sometimes it catches fire with sunset's reflection. Tonight it moves like liquid silver under a crescent moon, carrying secrets from distant lands, carrying whispers of peoples Rome has never conquered, never catalogued, never understood. He thinks often of those unknown shores. What stories flow past him each night, invisible as water? What dreams and sorrows travel these currents while he sits hunched over his endless paperwork, feeling smaller with each passing day? The camp settles into its evening rhythm around him. Somewhere, a soldier plays a haunting melody on a bone flute. The sound drifts through the cool air like smoke, like memory, like all the things that cannot be captured in official reports. Lucius finds himself listening, really listening. For the first time in days. This is what exhaustion does to us, isn't it? It strips away the performance, the constant doing, and leaves us sitting in lamplight, wondering what we're really here for. Lucius feels it too, this bone-deep weariness that comes not from physical labor, but from carrying everyone else's purposes while losing sight of his own. Earlier today, he transcribed another of the emperor's meditations. Marcus Aurelius, that philosopher king, writing about duty and acceptance and the cosmic order of things. Beautiful words, profound thoughts, but they felt like stones in Lucius's hands as he copied them. How easy it must be to contemplate the universe when you command it. How different those meditations might sound from the mouth of a scribe who spends his days making other people's words permanent, while his own thoughts scatter like ash. The tent flap stirs in the evening breeze, and through the gap Lucius can see the campfires dotting the darkness like earthbound constellations. Each fire circles a group of men sharing bread, wine, stories of home. He could join them, but something keeps him here, pen in hand, staring at the half-finished dispatch that waits for his attention. It's a report about grain shipments, nothing that will change the course of history, nothing that will be remembered when these camps are dust and the Danube has shifted its course a dozen times. Yet someone must write it. Someone must bear witness to these small, essential details that keep the world turning. Perhaps that's enough. Perhaps it has to be. The river whispers against the shore, a sound like distant conversation, like secrets being shared between old friends. Lucius rises from his desk and steps outside, drawn by that eternal murmur. The night air is crisp with autumn's approach, carrying scents of wood smoke and dying leaves and something else, something wild and untamed from across the water. Above, stars wheel in their ancient patterns, the same stars that watched over Caesar's legions, that will watch over emperors not yet born. Lucius feels suddenly dizzy with the vastness of it all. Time stretching backward and forward like the river itself, carrying all of them toward destinations they cannot see. A few tents away, he spots a familiar figure bent over his own writing. The emperor, Marcus Aurelius, working by lamplight just as Lucius was moments ago. Two men separated by everything the world considers important: birth, rank, power, purpose, yet united in this simple act of putting words to papyrus while the frontier sleeps around them. What does the most powerful man in the world write about in these quiet hours? What keeps him awake beside the Danube, wrestling with thoughts too complex for daylight? Lucius has copied enough of the imperial meditations to know they are not proclamations or battle plans, but something far more personal. A soul examining itself, questioning its place in the cosmic order. The scribe feels a strange kinship with that distant lamp, that bent figure writing through the night. Perhaps we are all trying to make sense of our place in this vast story. Perhaps the questions are the same, whether you command legions or simply record their movements. A night bird calls from across the river, answered by another from the Roman side. The sound carries perfectly over the water, a conversation spanning worlds. Lucius listens until the calls fade into silence, leaving only the eternal whisper of current against stone. He thinks of the letters he should write to his sister in Rome, words that would carry his own thoughts instead of other people's orders. He thinks of the stories he might tell if anyone cared to listen. Stories of this strange life on the edge of everything, where philosophy meets mud and glory reveals itself in the smallest gestures of ordinary men. But those letters remain unwritten, those stories untold. Tomorrow will bring more dispatches, more reports, more words that belong to other people. The machinery of empire never sleeps, and scribes are its humble servants, keeping the gears turning with their careful documentation. Still, tonight feels different somehow. Tonight the river seems to be calling his name, inviting him to listen more carefully to its ancient song. Tonight, the distance between emperor and scribe feels less important than the lamplight they share, the words they both struggle to find, the questions that keep them both awake while wiser men sleep. Lucius returns to his tent, but he does not immediately pick up his pen. Instead, he sits quietly, letting the night sounds wash over him. The river's whisper, the dying crackle of campfires, the soft breathing of an army at rest. Somewhere in that symphony, he senses the beginning of a different kind of story. Not the official history being written in the emperor's tent, but something more intimate, more true. A story about what it means to serve without glory, to witness without being seen, to carry other people's words while your own heart remains unspoken. A story about finding purpose in the margins, meaning in the mundane, connection across the vast distances that seem to separate us. The Danube flows on, carrying its cargo of secrets toward distant seas, and in his tent beside that eternal river, a young scribe finally understands that some stories can only be told by those who live them in shadow. Those who know what it means to be everything to everyone while forgetting sometimes who they are when no one is watching. The lamp burns lower, but Lucius does not yet reach for his pen. Tonight, for once, he simply listens, and in that listening discovers that the most important stories often begin not with grand proclamations, but with the simple courage to hear what the river has been trying to tell us all along. The weight of words. The next morning arrives with the familiar weight of duty. Lucius wakes to the sound of soldiers preparing for another day's march, their voices carrying across the camp like echoes of purpose he cannot quite grasp. The air is crisp with autumn's promise, and mist rises from the Danube like the breath of sleeping gods. He makes his way to the scribe's tent, where parchments await him in neat stacks, each one a vessel for words that belong to others. Today's task is particularly sacred, he's been told, excerpts from the emperor's own writings. Passages from what the camp whispers are Marcus Aurelius's private meditations. Lucius settles at his writing desk, the familiar weight of the reed pen in his fingers. Before him lies a scroll bearing the emperor's thoughts, and beside it, fresh parchment waiting to receive these profound words through his careful hand. He begins to copy the first passage. Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. The words flow from his pen with practiced precision, each letter formed with the skill of years. But as he writes, Lucius feels nothing. The wisdom that should illuminate feels distant, like sunlight glimpsed through heavy clouds. He is merely a conduit, he thinks, a vessel through which greatness passes without leaving its mark. Across the tent, Aulus, the senior scribe, works with a different energy entirely. His weathered face holds a quiet intensity as he copies the same passages, and Lucius notices how the older man pauses sometimes, not from fatigue, but as if savoring each word before committing it to parchment. The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts, Lucius writes, but the irony is not lost on him. His own thoughts feel small, mechanical, unworthy of such company. He glances again at Aulus, wondering what secret the older scribe possesses that transforms mere copying into something that resembles reverence. The morning progresses with the steady rhythm of quill against parchment. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. The emperor's words are clear, direct, yet Lucius feels like a child trying to wear armor that doesn't fit. What does it mean to be good when your days are spent in service to words you don't fully understand? He copies another passage. Remember that very little is needed to make a happy life. But happiness feels as distant as Rome itself. There is satisfaction in his work, yes, the pleasure of letters perfectly formed, lines evenly spaced. But happiness, that seems reserved for those who create rather than merely transcribe. Midway through the morning, a messenger arrives with fresh dispatches from the emperor's tent. Aulus rises to receive them, and Lucius watches as the senior scribe handles each scroll with the care one might show a newborn child. When Aulus returns to his desk, there's something different in his bearing, a quiet joy that Lucius envies. These words, Aulus says softly, not looking up from his work, they were not written for glory. They were written by a man trying to understand his own heart, just as we are. Lucius pauses, his pen hovering above the parchment. But surely the emperor's understanding is far greater than ours. Aulus smiles, the expression transforming his lined face. Perhaps wisdom lies not in having all the answers, but in asking the same questions we all ask, with courage enough to seek truth rather than comfort. The observation settles over Lucius like morning mist, present but not quite graspable. He returns to his copying, but now each word carries a different weight. The best revenge is not to be like your enemy. As he writes these words, he thinks of his own small resentments, the way he sometimes envies those whose words he copies, whose thoughts he preserves, while his own remain unrecorded. The hours pass in contemplative silence. Around midday, when the sun reaches its peak and the tent grows warm with golden light, Lucius finds himself copying a passage that stops him entirely. At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I have to go to work as a human being. He reads the words again, his pen motionless. There is something here, something that speaks not to emperors or philosophers, but to anyone who has ever felt the weight of another day's obligations. Marcus Aurelius, for all his power and wisdom, also knew the struggle of rising to meet duty when the spirit feels heavy. As a human being, Lucius whispers to himself, and suddenly the distance between emperor and scribe seems less vast. They are both, in their way, servants. One to an empire, the other to the preservation of its wisdom. Both rising each day to fulfill roles that sometimes feel larger than themselves. The afternoon brings new passages, each one a window into a mind grappling with the same fundamental questions that keep Lucius awake at night. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. As he copies these words, Lucius begins to understand what Aulus meant. These are not the polished pronouncements of distant authority, but the hard-won insights of someone who has wrestled with doubt, with duty, with the challenge of living well in an imperfect world. By evening, when the shadows grow long and the camp begins to settle into its nightly rhythms, Lucius has filled several scrolls with the emperor's meditations. But more than that, he has begun to feel a different relationship to the words flowing through his pen. He is not merely copying, he realizes. He is participating in a conversation that spans the breadth of the empire, a dialogue between one searching soul and another. The emperor writes his thoughts in the solitude of command, and Lucius, in his careful transcription, becomes a witness to that solitude, a guardian of those vulnerable moments when even the most powerful among us admit uncertainty. As he prepares to leave the scribe's tent, Aulus approaches his desk. "You work differently today," the older man observes. "I could see it in your posture, in the way you held your pen." Lucius nods, surprised by his own transformation. I began to hear something I hadn't heard before, not just the words, but the person behind them. "Ah," Aulus says with satisfaction, "now you begin to understand the true work of a scribe. We are not mere copyists. We are the bridge between one human heart and another. The emperor's wisdom reaches others not just through his words, but through our willingness to receive them, to let them pass through us with understanding rather than mere technique." That night, as Lucius walks beside the Danube, he carries with him not just the satisfaction of work well done, but something deeper, a sense of connection to the great conversation of human experience. The river flows beside him, constant and patient, and he thinks of how water, too, is a carrier, taking rain from distant mountains to far-off seas, connecting all the lands it touches. Perhaps this is what it means to find purpose in service. Not to diminish oneself, but to become part of something larger, to let wisdom flow through you while adding your own understanding to its passage. The stars emerge overhead, the same stars that shine on Marcus Aurelius in his tent, on soldiers dreaming of home, on countless others who look up and wonder about their place in the vast tapestry of existence. And Lucius, no longer feeling quite so small, allows himself to believe that even the humblest thread has its part to play in the pattern. Aulus's wisdom. The morning comes quietly to the Roman camp, painted in shades of pearl and gold. Lucius wakes before the horn sounds, his mind already turning over the words he copied yesterday. The emperor's reflections on duty, on purpose, on the weight of responsibility that presses down on every soul. He finds Aulus in the herb garden near the eastern wall, where the old scribe tends to the medicinal plants that grow in neat rows between the barracks and the river. The morning light catches the silver in Aulus's hair as he kneels beside a patch of chamomile, his weathered hands gentle among the delicate flowers. "You're awake early," Aulus observes without looking up, his voice carrying the warmth of someone who has learned to find peace in small rituals. The mind won't rest? Lucius settles beside him on the wooden bench that faces the garden, breathing in the mingled scents of lavender and thyme. I keep thinking about yesterday, about the Emperor's words, about my place in all of this. He pauses, watching Aulus's careful movements among the plants. How do you do it, Aulus? How do you find meaning in the copying, the endless transcription? Sometimes I feel like I'm just an echo of other people's thoughts. Aulus sits back on his heels, brushing earth from his palms. The watchtower rises behind them, its stone walls catching the first warm rays of sun. An echo, he repeats thoughtfully. Tell me, young friend, when you hear an echo in the mountains, does it diminish the original sound, or does it give it new life? I suppose it gives it new life, carries it further. Precisely. Aulus moves to sit beside him on the bench, his eyes kind and patient. When I was your age, stationed in Germania, I felt exactly as you do now. I was copying dispatches, letters from commanders to Rome, reports of grain supplies and troop movements, nothing that seemed to matter in the great sweep of history. There was an older scribe there, a Greek named Philippos, who had served in 3 campaigns. One day, much like this one, I confessed to him my feelings of insignificance. Do you know what he told me? Lucius shakes his head, drawn into the gentle rhythm of Aulus's voice. He said that every word we copy, every letter we form, is an act of preservation, that civilizations rise and fall, but the words endure. He showed me a scroll he was working on, a copy of Homer's verses. This poem, he said, has been copied by hundreds of scribes before you and will be copied by hundreds after. Each scribe adds something, their care, their attention, their reverence for the wisdom they're preserving. A bee drifts lazily between the lavender stalks, and somewhere in the distance, the camp begins to stir with the soft sounds of morning routine. But it's more than preservation, Aulus continues, his voice taking on the quality of shared confidence. When you copy the Emperor's meditations, you're not just recording his thoughts. You're living with them, dwelling in them, letting them shape your own understanding. The act of writing, it's a form of meditation itself. He reaches down to pick a sprig of mint, rolling it between his fingers until the scent rises sharp and clean in the morning air. I've copied Marcus Aurelius's reflections dozens of times now, and each time I discover something new. Not because the words have changed, but because I have changed. The wisdom finds new places to take root. Lucius feels something shift in his chest, a loosening of the tight knot of inadequacy he's carried. So, the copying itself is a kind of practice? The deepest kind. Aulus's smile is gentle, understanding. When your hand forms the letters, when your mind follows the flow of thought, when your heart opens to receive the wisdom, you become part of an unbroken chain, from teacher to student, from philosopher to scribe, from one seeking soul to another. The watchtower's shadow has shortened as the sun climbs higher, and Lucius can see the sentries changing their posts with quiet efficiency. The Danube flows beyond the walls, carrying its ancient burden of silt and stories toward distant seas. There's something else, Aulus says, and his voice drops to an even more intimate tone. Something Philippos taught me that I've never forgotten. He said that sometimes the most profound wisdom comes not from the great philosophers, but from those who serve them, from the scribes who wrestle with the meaning, who carry the words across distances and years, who ask the questions that keep the wisdom alive. He turns to face Lucius more directly, his eyes bright with conviction. Your questions, your doubts, your search for meaning. These aren't obstacles to overcome. They're the very things that make you worthy to carry these words forward. The emperor writes from his experience of power and responsibility. You bring the perspective of service, of humility, of the common human heart that seeks to understand its place in the world. A butterfly settles on the chamomile blossoms, its wings catching the light like stained glass. Lucius watches it, feeling something new stirring in his understanding, a sense not of his own importance, but of his connection to something larger and more enduring. I think, he says slowly, I've been looking at it wrong. I've been thinking I needed to be worthy of the words, instead of letting the words make me worthy. Aulus nods approvingly. Now you begin to understand. The wisdom doesn't demand that you be perfect, Lucius. It asks only that you be present, be open, be willing to let it work through you. He stands and brushes the earth from his tunic, then turns back to his young colleague with the expression of quiet encouragement. Today, when you sit with your stylus and parchment, remember this: you are not diminished by serving wisdom, you are enlarged by it. Every letter you form with care, every passage you copy with attention, every moment you spend dwelling in these thoughts, it all becomes part of who you are. The herb garden seems to pulse with quiet life around them, the bees among the blossoms, the gentle rustling of leaves, the distant murmur of the river. Lucius feels himself settling into this moment, this place, this purpose that no longer seems small but simply his own. And remember, too, Aulus adds with a knowing smile, that somewhere, perhaps years from now, someone else will read the words you copy today. They will hold the parchment you prepared, trace the letters you formed, and find in them exactly the wisdom they need. You may never know their name or see their face, but you will have served them, just as countless unknown scribes have served you. The morning horn sounds across the camp, calling the day to its duties. But Lucius no longer feels the weight of obligation as burden. Instead, he feels the quiet satisfaction of knowing his place in the great work of preserving and sharing what matters most. He rises from the bench, breathing in the fragrant air one more time, and prepares to return to his scrolls and stylus with new understanding. The words are waiting, patient as ever, ready to flow through him and into the world beyond. Finding the flow. Back in his quarters, Lucius settles into his familiar workspace with a different kind of intention. The oil lamp casts its steady glow across the wooden table, illuminating the fresh parchment that awaits his attention. But tonight he remembers Aulus's words about the rhythm, about the meditation hidden within each stroke of the stylus. He picks up his writing instrument, feeling its weight in his fingers as if for the first time. The bronze tip catches the lamplight, and he notices how the metal has been worn smooth by countless hours of use. His use. All those words, all those thoughts that have flowed through this simple tool, and through him. The passage he's been assigned is from the Emperor's Reflections on Acceptance. Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people with whom fate associates you. Simple words, yet Lucius knows they carry the weight of a ruler's deepest struggles. Instead of rushing to begin, he takes a breath and lets his gaze rest on the original text. Marcus Aurelius's own hand, or perhaps that of his personal scribe. The letters are elegant, but not perfect. Here and there, Lucius notices where the writer paused, where a letter was formed with less certainty, where the ink pooled slightly at the end of a word. These small imperfections don't diminish the wisdom. They make it more human, more real. Lucius dips his stylus and begins. But this time, he pays attention to the sensation of the bronze tip meeting the parchment, the slight resistance, the way the surface accepts the ink, the tiny sound it makes as he forms each letter. There's something almost sacred in this simple act of creation. Accept the things to which fate binds you. As he writes the word accept, he thinks about his own resistance to his role, his longing to be somewhere else, someone else. The irony isn't lost on him. Here he is, copying the emperor's words about acceptance while learning to accept his own path. The rhythm begins to emerge naturally. Dip, right, pause. Dip, right, pause. His breathing starts to align with the movement of his hand, in with the dip of the stylus, out with the formation of the letters. The garden's lessons are already taking root. And love the people with whom fate associates you. Lucius pauses here, stylus hovering above the parchment. Love the people fate has brought into his life. Aulus, certainly. The other scribes who share his daily routine, even Marcus Aurelius himself, this distant emperor whose thoughts Lucius carries so intimately, but also himself. Perhaps it's time to love this version of himself, this scribe who serves in quiet ways, who bridges the gap between wisdom and the world that needs to hear it. He continues writing, and something shifts. The letters begin to flow more naturally from his stylus, not because he's rushing, but because he's stopped fighting the process. Each word emerges with its own small beauty, its own reason for being. The parchment beneath his hand has its own texture, its own character. He can feel the subtle variations in the surface, the way some areas accept the ink more readily than others. Even this humble material has its own story. The animal whose skin became this writing surface, the craftsman who prepared it, the merchant who brought it to this frontier camp. Everything connected, everything part of a larger flow. As the evening deepens, Lucius finds himself entering a state he's never quite experienced before. His mind is both focused and relaxed, attentive to each letter, while also aware of the larger pattern emerging on the page. The words seem to write themselves through him, as if he's become a willing channel for their expression. He notices his posture has improved without conscious effort. His shoulders are relaxed, his breathing steady. The tension he usually carries in his neck and back has melted away. This is what Aulus meant about the work being its own reward. The oil in his lamp burns lower, casting longer shadows across his workspace. But Lucius feels no urgency to finish quickly. Each word deserves its moment, its careful formation. Each letter is a small act of devotion. The best revenge is not to be like your enemy. As he copies this line, Lucius thinks about his own small resentments, his envy of those who seem to have more exciting roles, more recognition, his frustration with the repetitive nature of his work. These feelings haven't disappeared entirely, but they seem smaller now, less important than the work itself. He sets down his stylus for a moment and stretches his fingers. Looking at what he's accomplished, he feels a quiet pride, not the desperate need for recognition he's carried before, but something deeper. The satisfaction of work done with care, with attention, with love. The letters on the page are beautiful in their own right, each one carefully formed, consistent with the others, creating a harmony across the surface of the parchment. This, too, is an art form, he realizes. The art of faithful reproduction, of careful preservation, of making wisdom accessible. A gentle breeze stirs through his quarters, carrying the scent of the herb garden and the distant sound of the river. The camp is settling into its nighttime rhythm. Guards changing shifts, fires banking low, the soft murmur of conversations winding down. Lucius returns to his work, but now he's part of this larger rhythm too. His writing becomes a meditation, a prayer of sorts. Each word he copies is an offering to the wisdom itself, to those who will read it, to the great chain of knowledge that stretches back through time and forward into an unknown future. He thinks of other scribes in other places doing similar work, copying, preserving, passing on the thoughts and discoveries that matter, all of them part of this quiet army of preservation, this network of careful hands and attentive minds. The realization brings him comfort. He's not alone in this work. He's part of something much larger than himself, much more important than his individual recognition or advancement. As he nears the end of the assigned passage, Lucius finds himself slowing down rather than speeding up. He wants to savor these final moments of pure focus, this state of flow he's discovered. Tomorrow there will be more texts to copy, more wisdom to preserve. But right now, there's just this moment, this word, this careful stroke of the stylus. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. The final line emerges on the parchment with particular clarity. Lucius sets down his stylus and reads over his work. The words seem to glow in the lamplight, each one perfectly formed, the entire passage flowing like a gentle river across the page. He's found it finally. The flow that Aulus spoke of, not just in the writing, but in his understanding of his place in the world. He doesn't need to be Marcus Aurelius to matter. He doesn't need to lead armies or rule empires to contribute something meaningful. He needs only to be himself, fully, carefully, lovingly, himself. The lamp flickers slightly as a breeze passes through the quarters, and Lucius carefully caps his ink and cleans his stylus. Tomorrow will bring new passages to copy, new wisdom to preserve. But tonight, he has learned something that no text could have taught him. He has learned to find the sacred in the simple, the profound in the practical, the flow in the faithful work of his hands. The river's reflection. The next morning arrives with the familiar sounds of camp life stirring to wakefulness. Lucius completes his assigned passages earlier than usual, his newfound rhythm making the work flow like water over stones. The words seem to copy themselves, each letter finding its place with quiet certainty. As the sun reaches its peak, he sets down his stylus and stretches his shoulders. The quarters feel suddenly small, filled with the weight of concentrated thought. His body calls for movement, for air, for the simple pleasure of walking without purpose. He makes his way through the camp toward the river. Soldiers tend to their duties, some sharpening weapons, others mending leather, a few gathered around a small fire sharing the midday meal. Their voices create a gentle hum of human activity, but Lucius finds himself drawn beyond it all, toward the constant whisper of the Danube. The riverbank welcomes him with soft earth beneath his feet. Here, away from the structured lines of the camp, the world feels different, wider somehow. The river moves with ancient patience, carrying its burden of water toward distant seas he has never seen. Lucius settles on a fallen log that has been smoothed by countless others who sought this same refuge. The wood is warm from the sun, solid and reassuring beneath him. He watches the water flow past, always moving, never the same twice. How long has this river been flowing? Long before Marcus Aurelius was born, long before Rome itself existed. It has witnessed the rise and fall of peoples whose names are now forgotten. It has carried the reflections of countless faces, warriors and farmers, mothers and children, scribes and emperors. The thought brings him a strange comfort. His own worries, his questions about purpose and meaning, they too are part of this endless flow. Not permanent fixtures to be solved, but passing currents in the greater stream of existence. A fish breaks the surface near the opposite bank, sending ripples in perfect circles across the water. Lucius watches as they expand outward, each ring growing fainter until they disappear entirely into the river's steady movement. Even this small disturbance is absorbed, integrated, made part of the whole. He thinks of the passages he copied this morning. Marcus Aurelius writing about the impermanence of all things. Time is a river of vanishing appearances, the emperor had written. Sitting here now, Lucius understands those words not just with his mind, but with his entire being. The wars that rage along these borders, they too shall pass. The empire that seems so permanent, so all-encompassing, it too is subject to the same laws of change that govern the river's flow. Nothing remains exactly as it is. Everything moves, everything transforms. But there is peace in this recognition, not despair. If everything changes, then his current struggles are not permanent either. If everything flows, then he need not cling so tightly to his fears about significance and purpose. A movement downstream catches his attention. A young soldier sits alone on the bank, perhaps 20 paces away. He hasn't noticed Lucius, absorbed as he is in some quiet activity. The soldier holds a stick, moving it carefully in the wet sand at the water's edge. Curious, Lucius rises and walks closer, his footsteps soft on the muddy ground. As he approaches, he sees what the soldier is creating. Intricate patterns in the sand, geometric designs that spiral and intersect with surprising beauty. The young man works with complete concentration, adding lines and curves with the patience of a master craftsman. "That's remarkable," Lucius says softly, not wanting to startle him. The soldier looks up, his face flushing slightly. "Oh, it's nothing really. Just something I do when I need to think. May I watch?" The soldier nods, returning to his work. His stick moves with practiced precision, creating a mandala of interconnected circles and flowing lines. Each stroke is deliberate, mindful, as if the act of drawing itself is a form of prayer. "I'm not much good with words," the soldier explains as he works. "Never learned letters properly, but this helps me understand things somehow. When my thoughts get tangled, I come here and draw until they straighten out." Lucius settles beside him, watching the pattern grow more complex and beautiful. "What's your name?" "Marcus, not the Emperor Marcus," he adds with a shy smile. "Just regular Marcus, from a farm outside Aquileia. I'm Lucius. I work with words all day, copying texts, preserving writings. But I think what you're doing here might be just as important." Marcus pauses in his drawing, looking at Lucius with surprise. "Really, it's just pictures in sand. The next tide will wash it all away." "Will it, though?" Lucius gestures toward the pattern. "You've created something beautiful. You've found your own way to think, to process your experiences. That's not nothing, Marcus. That's everything." The young soldier considers this, then adds a final flourish to his design, a series of small spirals that seem to dance around the central pattern. "I never thought of it that way." They sit in comfortable silence, watching the river flow past the temporary artwork. The sand drawing is indeed impermanent, but in this moment it exists in perfect completeness. Like the fish's ripples, like the words Lucius copies, like their own lives, meaningful not despite their impermanence, but because of it. "Do you ever wonder," Marcus asks, "what the point is? All this fighting, all this effort we put into things that won't last?" Lucius smiles, thinking of his own recent struggles with this very question. "I used to, but sitting here now, watching your beautiful work, watching the river, I think maybe the point isn't to create something permanent. Maybe it's to create something true, something that matters in this moment, to this person, in this place." Marcus nods slowly, understanding passing between them like the current beneath the water's surface. Two men, one who works with words and one who draws in sand, finding the same truth by different paths. The afternoon sun shifts, casting longer shadows across the riverbank. Soon they will both need to return to their duties. Marcus to his weapons and drills, Lucius to his stylus and parchment. But they have shared something here that transcends their different roles. As they rise to leave, Marcus carefully smooths over his sand drawing with his boot. The gesture is not destructive but ceremonial, a conscious releasing, a letting go that honors what was while making space for what will be. "Thank you," he says to Lucius, "for seeing it, for understanding." "Thank you," Lucius replies, "for showing me another way to be present with the work of our hands." They walk back toward the camp together, their footsteps creating temporary impressions in the soft earth. Behind them, the river continues its eternal flow, carrying their reflections downstream toward whatever awaits beyond the horizon. A lasting contribution. The scriptorium feels different when Lucius returns, softer somehow, as if the lamplight itself has grown more gentle in his absence. The familiar scent of parchment and ink welcomes him back, but now these simple elements seem touched with something sacred, something he hadn't noticed before his walk by the river. He settles at his writing desk, where the scroll of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations waits exactly as he left it. The emperor's words seem to shimmer slightly in the flickering light, patient and eternal. Lucius dips his reed pen into the ink, feeling the weight of it in his fingers. Not heavy with burden now, but substantial with purpose. The first stroke flows across the parchment like water finding its course. Each letter emerges with deliberate care, carrying within it all the understanding he has gathered, from Aulus's wisdom in the herb garden, from the emperor's vulnerable humanity, from young Marcus's temporary art by the river's edge. "We were born to work together," he copies, and feels the truth of these words settle into his bones. The emperor wrote them perhaps in a moment of weariness, perhaps in a tent much like the ones that surround this very scriptorium, and now Lucius carries them forward, one careful letter at a time. The night deepens around him, but he feels no urgency. Time moves differently here in this space between day and dreams, where the only sounds are the gentle scratch of reed against parchment and the distant murmur of the river. Other scribes work quietly at their own tables, each tending their own small flame of preservation. As he writes, Lucius thinks of all the hands that will one day hold this scroll, all the eyes that will trace these same words he forms now in the lamplight. He sees them clearly somehow. A young woman in a villa garden, seeking comfort after loss, an old philosopher in Alexandria, finding new meaning in familiar wisdom, a soldier on a distant frontier, reading by his own campfire under foreign stars. His pen moves steadily across the parchment, creating an unbroken chain of understanding that stretches both backward and forward through time. Behind him, he feels the presence of all who have preserved these words before, and ahead, the countless souls who will find solace in their careful transmission. "Very little is needed to make a happy life," flows from his pen, and he smiles softly. The emperor's words about simplicity take on new meaning here in this quiet moment. This simple act of faithful copying that somehow contains the whole universe. The scroll grows longer beneath his careful attention, each passage a bridge between one searching heart and another. He copies the emperor's thoughts on impermanence, remembering young Marcus's sand drawings, already claimed by the river's edge. He transcribes reflections on duty, thinking of Aulus's gentle guidance and steady presence. Each word connects to something real, something lived and felt and understood. When he reaches the final passage of the night's work, Lucius pauses, his pen hovering above the parchment like a bird preparing to alight. The emperor's last meditation speaks of legacy, of the mark we leave not through grand gestures, but through small acts of faithfulness, through showing up day after day to the work that calls us. He completes the passage with particular care, forming each letter as if it were itself a small prayer. The final period settles onto the parchment like a gentle sigh, and then, in the space that remains at the scroll's end, Lucius does something he has never done before. With the same careful attention he brings to the emperor's words, he begins to draw. His pen traces the delicate outline of a flower. Not any flower, but the small blue bloom he noticed growing wild along the Danube's bank, the one that caught the last light as he walked with young Marcus back toward camp. The drawing emerges slowly under his careful hand. 5 petals opening like a gentle star, a slender stem, leaves that curve with natural grace. It is simple, humble. No grand artistic statement, but something true and observed and offered with love. His own small mark at the end of the emperor's great wisdom. A reminder that beauty grows everywhere, even in the margins, even in the spaces between important words. As he adds the final details to his little flower, Lucius feels something settle deep within his chest, a contentment he has never quite known before. This scroll, when it travels beyond this camp, will carry not only Marcus Aurelius's profound meditations, but also this small testimony, this quiet evidence that someone was present, someone was paying attention, someone cared enough to notice the beauty that blooms unnoticed along forgotten riverbanks. He sets down his pen and studies his work in the lamplight. The emperor's words flow across the parchment in steady lines, each letter formed with devotion. And there at the end, his small flower blooms eternal, captured in ink and intention. Together, they tell a complete story. Wisdom and wonder, profundity and presence, the great and the small united in one continuous song. Around him, the scriptorium grows quieter as other scribes complete their evening's work. Oil lamps are gently extinguished one by one, but Lucius remains a moment longer, not to continue working, but simply to be present with what he has created. This scroll will outlive him, will carry his careful attention far beyond anything he can imagine, and somehow that thought brings not sadness, but deep peace. He thinks of Aulus, probably already asleep in his simple quarters, dreaming perhaps of the herb garden where wisdom grows as naturally as mint and sage. He thinks of young Marcus, whose sand art has long since merged with the river's flow, but whose understanding of impermanent beauty will travel with him to whatever distant shores await. He thinks of the emperor himself, somewhere in this vast camp, setting down his own pen after another day of carrying the weight of the world. All of them connected, all of them part of this great work of being human, of paying attention, of preserving what matters and letting go of what doesn't. The scroll before him represents not just his individual effort, but their collective understanding, a tapestry woven from many threads of attention and care. Lucius carefully rolls the completed parchment, securing it with a simple cord. Tomorrow it will begin its journey. Copied again by other careful hands, read by other searching hearts, adding its voice to the great conversation that spans centuries and connects souls across impossible distances. He extinguishes his lamp with a gentle breath, and the scriptorium settles into peaceful darkness. Outside, the Danube continues its eternal flow, carrying moonlight on its surface like scattered silver coins. The camp sleeps around him. Soldiers and scribes, officers and servants, all resting after another day of showing up to the work that calls them. Walking slowly to his quarters, Lucius feels the day's labors settling into his bones. Not as fatigue, but as satisfaction. The deep contentment that comes from knowing you have been faithful to something larger than yourself. His small room welcomes him with familiar simplicity. A narrow bed, a wooden chest, a window that frames a piece of star-scattered sky. As he prepares for sleep, he thinks one last time of his little flower, now preserved forever, at the end of an emperor's meditation on impermanence. The irony makes him smile. Something so small and temporary, captured in ink and made eternal through the simple act of paying attention, of caring enough to include beauty in the margins of important work. He lies down on his simple bed and closes his eyes, feeling the day's discoveries settling into dreams. In his mind, he sees again the river's patient flow, Aulus's knowing smile, young Marcus's hands shaping temporary beauty from sand and water, and running through it all like a golden thread, the understanding that his work matters, that every careful letter connects him to the great chain of human seeking and finding and sharing. Sleep comes gently, carrying him toward dreams where emperors and scribes walk together along riverbanks, where flowers bloom eternal, where every word written with love becomes a bridge between one heart and another, where the smallest acts of faithfulness ripple outward like stones dropped in still water, creating circles of meaning that expand beyond sight into the vast mystery of all we are called to preserve and pass forward. One careful letter, one moment of attention, one small flower blooming in the margins at a time.